All right, let's get it. All right, so I just gave this presentation, doing this guest lecture for this class. I've learned that the presentation didn't record, so I really liked it. So while it's fresh, I just want to redo it again. Teaching context clues is one of my favorite things to teach as a professor and as a teacher and as a children's author. So um, let's do take two. Give me more water. Hold on. Ah, I hate to say take two, like take one was a mess up. Let's do it. All right, so let me share my screen. All right. Teaching context. Whoa, did you hear that? It's kind of okay, okay. It's kind of scary out there. All right, let's get to it. So teaching context clues. Just getting this presentation just probably about 20 minutes ago. So I wanted to revisit. Yeah, get the doggies. She was a little scared. Thanks, guy. All right, cool. Just some references, some of the places that I got a lot of this information from. C Palms, Reading Rockets, a simple view of reading, different ways, different places as well. Hey there. All right. All right, let's get it started. So a little bit about me. My name is Dr. Michael Woodward. I'm a children's author, love to read, love to write. Don't know which one I like to do more, but I do love to be a part of children's lives in proximity to literature. Literature that's designed to encourage, that's championed, that's designed to represent, that's designed to affirm who these kids are and what they can become. All of them, every child, every zip code. All right, that's enough about me. Let's get right into it. To analyze reading would be to describe very many of the most intricate workings of the human mind. So, like I asked, what does that mean? We know that the brain is so complex, and that's just such an understatement when you think of the mechanisms, the many mechanisms that work in harmony with one another just to do conscious and subconscious level tasks. I try my hardest not to go down rabbit holes throughout our time together, but I wouldn't be surprised if I went down a couple. So when we think about the brain and we think about the different parts of the brain and the different things that each of them does, in a sense, wow, the phone's going crazy. So hopefully, jeez, give me some peace, guys. All right, cool. So back to the reading brain. So when we think of every child's brain has to change the way it functions as the child learns to read. So we think of this multi-pronged approach to the neuroscience and neurology of the brain and the different parts of the brain and how they control different functions that we are consciously and unconsciously aware of. Reading doesn't just take place in one specific section of the brain. If we know that different parts of the brain work and act in a way that does different things that compounds when it comes time to read and put them all together, what happens? And I think of a certain particular part of the brain that takes to the age of 26 to develop. What happens then? Are we saying that even as people grow, their decision making and critical thinking skills are continuing to be refined and developed? And I don't think that's anything that's really surprising to any of us. But what if when we throw in an additional layer of that, while everyone has to learn to read or everyone should know how to read, everyone's brain functions, operates differently, speaks to the uniqueness in which we all are. And I think that adds another layer and another complexity to teaching reading. But when I think of reading, and now follow me as I go down the Sigmund Freud tier 3 rabbit hole, we think of this level of conscious, subconscious, and unconscious mindsets that we carry. When we think of how we don't know the answer to something and we're just thinking so hard, so hard, what is the answer? And the moment you take some time to stop putting effort into it, to relax, it's wild how the answer can just come to you. They talk about Sigmund Freud, so many other theories, they talk about how the subconscious state is a supercomputer and it's constantly collecting data. Well, just to land this plane, when I think of the importance of teaching reading to a child, we add to this complexity of knowledge, but in a way where it's salient and it can be retained. I want a child to be able to decode so well that naturally they do it before they even read the word. I know that sounds crazy, but when you think of how fast our brains are and it's collecting data before we even are able to process it. So as that child encounters that word via text, shown in some way subconsciously, I want them to be able to read it. That's the interesting thing about neurology. Okay. So zoom out, zoom out. We're talking about literacy here now. So reading rockets teaches us about the 5 pillars of literacy, whichever one you like the most. That is cool and fine and dandy. However, all 5 have to come together so that children can read. They have to be able to read, but in a sense, they have to be able to master. They have to be able to master all of these different pillars or these different components of reading. It may be incredibly complex as you segment and you try to take on each category in a way that offers mastery in some sense. But fret not, because we got this simple view of reading by Wesley Hoover and Go. And it talks about how simply decoding times language comprehension equals the reading comprehension that we're in search of. And it's as though like it's so easy to come about. It's such a simplistic view that if we can teach children how to decode and we can teach them how to comprehend the language, then reading comprehension should come about. It sounds like anyone can do it, but what about our English language learners? What if even being able to understand and acquire the language is a disadvantage to some? You know, and I don't want to go take us down the what if scenario, but when we think about this simple view of reading, we learn that decoding is the ability to rapidly derive representation from printed input. They must be able to break down the word, its affixes, its suffixes, prefixes, its root word, all the way to being able to understand, to derive sentence and discourse interpretations from what is presented, i.e., comprehension. So we think of the reading rope that Dr. Scarborough came up with. She did that lecture in 2006 that where she had the braids and the different strings that were representative of the different reading strands within language comprehension and word recognition that were braided together in a way that produces skill reading. And that's the exciting thing. It's knowing that all these different things are interwoven, are woven together, and it's that harmonious input that brings about a great or soon to be great reader. So we also learned from Beck, McCown, and Kukan that there are 3 tier frameworks, a 3-tier framework when it comes to vocabulary. So you have tier 1, tier 3, and tier 2, with tier 1 producing the most basic words. Those, those little 3 and 4 and 5 point Scrabble words. Those little words that are considered basic. When we think of tier 3 words that are more categorically used, words that you'll find in photosynthesis, words that you'll find that are limited to specific topics. Now, when we think of tier 2 words, we think of words that are of which higher utility. These are words I'm saying that like that may raise an eyebrow or like, hey, what did that person just say? Like, hey, hold on now. I need to write that down, or what does that word mean? But I don't want to admit it out loud. It's okay. That's what Google's for, guys. So, typically, I'd ask like, whoa, what tier level of vocabulary do you think we should be utilizing with our students? It's tier 2. Tier 2 is the one, words that are rarely used, words that we can sprinkle in. I used to call it spicy vocab with my 3rd graders. And, when we come across these words during independent reading from authors all over the world, and they'd show us a more enriching experience within literacy, we write them down. We put them on the wall. The spicy vocab wall. Come on now. All right, let's keep it moving. So when we think of context clues and the acquisition of vocabulary, especially new and unfamiliar words, we think of the role of tricky context in word acquisition, the trickiness of it, the trickiness. Now, we know that unfamiliar words and vocabulary presents itself in ways that are in and outside of the classroom. We think of the conversations that we have in the hallways with children. We think of the conversations that we have at the lunch table, on the blacktop, at the recess playground. What about the conversations with children that happen on standardized testing and assessments and criteria and reference testing? Many of the contexts that the way these words are used can come off misdirective, non-directive, offer a general context. Children can spend time, wasted time, trying to identify unknown words through the trickiness of their contextual analysis, and that's tough. I'm not a fan. I think what I'm really not a fan of, beyond the trickiness of context within newfound words, is incidental vocabulary learning. Now, this is, of course, something that I want to continue to just delve into because as an inspirer, like as someone who is looking to teach, impact, and create a change within the minds of others, there is nothing incidental about the vocabulary that we use, the richness, the words that we select, the the exchanges with children, with adults. And I don't want to say it's a bravado and a showcase type of sense, but it could be enlightening. I mean, it is enlightening to teach people and to show things that they may have yet to come across themselves. So they talk about most vocabulary being acquired incidentally or through indirect exposure. Well, if you've watched this much of this video, I guarantee you are incidentally um, engaging with people in a way where you or them or whoever they are walking away with something. Put forth a good use of your time by learning, expanding your vocabulary. All right, I don't want to beat that horse up. When we think about this quote, although children learn to listen and speak without formal instruction, learning to read is not natural. It must be taught. Learning to read is not natural. It must be taught. It's interesting how language is acquired and how we can have these conversations with our mother, our father, our brothers, our siblings, our people on the playground. We can change up our dialect and colloquialisms. And this is informal, indirect instruction, teaching the music that we listen to. But when we think about reading, you must be taught how to read. You must have alphabetic knowledge. You must have the components, the 5 components of reading in some way, some more than others if you don't have them all, but you got to be able to decipher print and text, which you must be taught. Oh, this is my girl. This is my girl right here. If you don't know who this lady is, when she puts on this face, she's gathering the clues. She is gathering the clues. So when we think of Mariska, what's her last name? Harigate. I'm sorry, but I do love her as an actress. She's amazing. But she's gonna follow up on those leads. She's going to check the surrounding area of the crime that has been committed. But in this case, we're talking about context clues. We're talking about deciphering the meaning of new words, unknown words, just to many kids, unfamiliar words. So we're looking before and after these words. We may be looking in the same sentence before, the sentence after. We're looking at surrounding words that can give readers helpful context clues about the meaning of these words. So some self-questioning strategies, some things that teachers might want to ask themselves are, what are the surrounding words? Or that teachers want to ask their children. How do these offer me clues, these surrounding words? What does this word mean in terms of this context? And we can see this through many of the standards that are present within CPALMs here in the state of Florida. Being able to effectively utilize context clues is a foundational skill for great readers. And to me, it's a chain reaction that leads to fluent and independent readers. So we have different common types of context clues, different ways to gather contextual evidence to determine the meaning of unknown words. Also, I found some more uh, like teachers pay teachers and just other ways and other resources to help understand, like, all right, what are the different ways that we can teach concepts? Because there isn't just one. And even with this demonstration that I just did with the class, I also came to the realization that there isn't just one context clue that you can use. And I think that's kind of like a duh moment, but to be able to define the context clue that you use in order to define the word, I think piques an interest to me. Sorry. sorry. All right. So we played a quick game, which I love playing games. We could play this game right now. If I was teaching direct instruction, if I was teaching vocabulary to a group of third graders, fifth graders, it really doesn't matter when it comes time to teaching context clues. It doesn't matter what grade level it is. Of course, the intensity and the rigor of the question matters, but ultimately we are we are met with a word we've never seen before. What does this word mean? What are the context clues that I can use to figure this out if I'm a brand new reader? Okay. All right. So I don't want to know I don't want you to tell me the definition of the word. I know you know the definition of the word. I want to know the context clue strategy that we use to identify the word. So, oh, I didn't even tell you. This is like one of my books, The Mighty Monarch Butterfly. I had it translated into Spanish as well and adapted by Susana Martinez, who is just amazing. But it's one of my most exciting books. I don't want to say my favorite book because they're listening, all of them. All right. So this book in particular, I wrote, so I think 2024, I believe. Anyways, it's embedded with vocabulary because I love vocabulary. I love to teach vocabulary to children. So when we think of one of our first vocabulary words, flounced. She fluttered and floated and flounced through the trees, zipping by dandelions and saying hello to the bees. So I've got our vocab word explicitly. Hey, we found it. Here it is. I would stop reading. I would read this page. I'd probably read the whole spread. And then I'd be like, did anyone hear the vocab word? Just to make sure, like, all right, were we listening, right? And do we remember what the vocab word is? And once we've identified it, then we define it. Of course, we know the definition of flounce, or we can determine it using the context clues that I just shared with you. But we know it's to move with sudden determination, move vividly. So we remind them, like, all right, what context clues can we use to determine this unknown word? So now I'm giving a child several different ways, several different indicators and things to look for to define this word. And I don't want to limit them to just the vocab word. Remember, in context clues, we're looking at before and we're looking out after the words. So all the good stuff before and the good stuff after, we want it all because it'll help us determine what flounce means. There's another one. Let's skip to it. I've got to keep going. I just can't sit here and mope. So mope is the vocabulary word. Oh, I didn't even say for flounced. We gave examples. I gave a list. So I gave three synonyms that you know, all kind of share very similar, graceful, beautiful movement with determination. So that was the context clue. And there's more than one. Don't think there's just one answer. All right. I'm sorry. So we've got mope, to give oneself up. I've got to keep going. I just can't sit here and mope. So I would ask, what context clue can we use? And there's a different one. From the recent presentation, someone said inference. And I was like, yeah, that's a good one because interestingly, logic was one of the context clues from reading Rockets. So just goes to show like the different names for many of the same actions or definitions that we all know of. But he made an educated guess based off of the context of the sentence. Me, I was thinking antonym. I've got to keep going. I've got to keep going forward. Whereas the vocabulary mope means to concede, to stop, to give up, to no longer advance. So for me, it was antonym, but it's exciting to know that it is a layered approach. In different ways, different meaning can be given to different context clues. One of the final spreads I used, fog rolled in as the butterfly flitted through the clouds, talking to herself, thinking out loud. I've got to keep going. I know they're not far away. I can feel it in my wings. I just have to pray. Flitted is the vocab word. Flitted means to pass quickly or abruptly, to move in an erratic, fluttering manner. Flitted. So I'd ask, like, hey, what context clue can we use to identify? So for me, I think it was illustration. And if we go back to the reading Rockets, hold on, it talked about illustration, example or illustration. And I used the illustration. I illustrated, cause number one caveat, I have to compete with my illustrators. Like they're really good. So I got to make sure my words are just equally as impactful and they're just as punchy. But at the same time, people need to be able to define the words, people as in children. So I illustrated the word or the scene and the setting as a whole beyond the illustration of the picture. We talked about the fog rolling in, and we talked about the clouds and the butterfly going through. He flitted through the clouds. Love it. All right, cool. Yeah, I think that's really about it. So it was exciting. I really like that presentation. I think there's always room for improvement, of course, always things we can get better. Another reason why I wanted to record it, and then of course upload it for the world. Feel free to take what you may. But I'll continue to grow, I'll continue to read, and most importantly, well, I think most importantly is we continue to read, but I'll continue to write, be vulnerable, inspire the masses, you guys. I wish you the best. Thank you for the privilege.